So, hi, my name is Sadie Sharp, and you are watching Sharp Shares, the weekly video blog about everything in life that makes us who we are as a human being. So, everything from work, life, education, charity, and everything in between. Now, one of the big turning points for me in life about 3 years ago was where I started, should say, kind of working my way out of my kind of corporate lifestyle and living out of a suitcase. And I launched a not-for-profit about 3 years ago, which I would not have been able to do had it been for an awful lot of help with local people that I knew before, but also made new contacts of. One of which is a lovely gent called James Phipps, and he has a wealth of experience around starting not-for-profits, moving from maybe the business world into the not-for-profit world, but also having run a social trust, sitting on funding boards, launching his own charity, and helping other organizations like my youth project. So James has been very kind to come and have a chat with me about all of those sorts of things and see where the conversation goes. So hi James, thanks for joining us.
Hi Sadie. I love the Sharp shares. The James shares just doesn't have the same ring to it, so I think you've done well.
Be a James Jostles kind of conversation, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it doesn't have the same ring, does it?
No, I mean, you know, go down a whole other line with that one, couldn't you? Right, so now I obviously know your background, and I think a lot of people who have probably seen your face plastered all over a lot of different media sources may know a little bit about you, but I thought what would be really interesting is if maybe you could share briefly for me kind of your background in business and how on earth you managed to make that transition from sort of corporate world, working for yourself, exiting, and then moving more into the kind of the philanthropic activities and supporting other organizations and launching your own.
Yeah, so I was born in Swindon in a council estate, a really rough area of Swindon. And although I was desperate, frankly, to move out of that area, and I moved out when I was 16, I just had this absolute desire to always help people. So for me, when I went into the world of business, and I did that by becoming an MD at the age of 30 of a company, and in 2013, I bought that company. And over the next 5 years, massively expanded and grew it into a Times Top 100 employer, very successful IT and communications firm. Selling that majority shares to the team in 2018. In amongst that, also buying and selling several other ventures as well, because I was bored, and wanted to make sure that actually I learned a lot from different people and different experiences and different businesses and different sectors, etc. So I've had a real whirlwind, although I've just become 40, not that long ago. I've packed a lot into those years from a business career sense, and really by selling the majority shares, it's enabled me to spend all of my time and resource to just dedicate myself to helping other people. It makes me happy, and my wife has known that, who's been with me since the school, has known it's the thing that makes me smile. Was never about the being successful in any monetary term or business sense. It was making other people smile. So that's now what I spend all my time doing, and how we crossed our paths, because I have a particular passion for young people, because ultimately a couple of people in my life believed in me and this young little kid who came from a council estate and gave me that chance in life, and also homelessness. So they're my two real passions that I've got a real piece for.
Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about some of the stuff that you started up? Because I know you have your own charitable foundation, and you're kind of sitting on the board of a number of other not-for-profit organisations and helping them.
Yeah.
And also you've got obviously some experience of sitting on things like funders boards and such. So you've obviously got lots of different perspectives with regards to kind of not-for-profits and how you make it work.
Yeah, I wear lots of hats, which is quite good because I need the hair covering, especially when it's sunny shining. Yeah, so I've helped lots and lots of different groups for absolutely decades. I think I did my first sleep out for the homeless when I was 16. So I've always had an affinity with lots of charity groups. And as I've grown in terms of business and my understanding of there, I've used lots of those skills along the way to help certain groups. Some of that's manifested itself and I'm becoming a trustee. So places like Wheelchair Ambulance, the Wheelchair Community Foundation, which gives £1 million a year away in grants around Swindon and Wiltshire to vulnerable groups. a great local to Swindon youth project, which I know you know very well, Sadie, and also I've done lots of stuff around lots of youth projects, specifically Inner Flame, all these ones that I've helped support, etc. I came across someone in mid 2015, I think it was, and we were chatting. We both had this passion for young people, and she was doing some stuff for some young people in Africa. And I've been to Africa many times, and we had a real meeting of hearts. So we both co-founded this charitable foundation, which was to help young people in Wiltshire, Swindon, and also in Kenya. And we've helped to build schools in Kenya, and helped to improve the lives of thousands, literally thousands of young people, both home and abroad. So that's given me a real insight into the starting something from day one, and hugely painful that is to set up a charitable foundation. And I'm not great with detailed paperwork and thinking. I'm entrepreneurial ultimately, as you are, Sadie, as well. We're not good at that naturally. It's not a natural gift for most entrepreneurial type people. Yeah, you have people around you that complement your weaknesses, and I've always had people around me for that. So having to do some of that stuff was most definitely tricky. But actually, by sitting there, being involved in other charities like the Community Foundation, where we're helping thousands of other groups, it gives you a real insight to some of the pressures and some of the challenges that are there when you are trying to set something up from what you have as a passion to something that's a vehicle that can go and then help those people. So it's a massively broad kind of spectrum that I'm involved in, but it does mean from being something that's giving out grants or something that's benefiting from that grants, and some of the challenges you see with lots of these groups that are trying to achieve something but don't know how to achieve it, get to see that all day, every day, basically.
Yeah, and I think that was part of the reason, I think, for wanting to run this kind of video interview, because obviously I've done quite a bit of work in my kind of consulting hat when I was still doing the corporate work with not-for-profits and trying to help them develop and grow and be more sustainable. And it's like I say, it's that sort of skill set that not everybody has, because they're a great outreach worker, or they're a great charitable person. They're great at that, but not necessarily the business stuff. But I think having gone through that startup curve myself, it's so much easier to help it when it's somebody else's organization than it is when it's your own, right? It's like you're too close to it. You're sort of in the eye of the storm. So I thought it would be really useful to start to maybe look at the early startup stages of a not-for-profit. I think are probably the most hardest stages to try and get through, because it's like launching a business, which in itself is difficult. But at least when you launch a business, you're launching a business in order to make money. Then you use that money to then grow the business. But within a not-for-profit, it's like you're trying to start something with no money, and then you're trying to grow it with even less money. And I think having been involved in not-for-profit organizations at so many different stages of their life cycle, what would you say, in your experience, I guess, makes for a great startup? Because I think a lot of people maybe don't look at having a not-for-profit startup to think, I haven't got enough time or money, or I don't have the experience or the connections, but they've got maybe a great idea. So what would you say makes for a great startup, not-for-profit? And then what maybe are the key challenges that people are experiencing when they're trying to make their dream a reality?
The most successful ones that I've seen or I've experienced are ones where someone is bringing an innate passion for the cause. When I met you, and I've been exactly the same in business. Every business that I've invested in the person who's really lead it, who's founded it. Because when it gets tough, that passion mixed with resilience is the bit that gets you through. You find a way, and ultimately it is no different in setting up a not-for-profit as it is for setting up a business in that traditional term. The challenges are very, very similar, except, like you say, lots of people define their success in a business of how much money they're making, or how many people they're employing, etc., etc. And a bit similar to the NHS in the UK, you can't judge it like that. It's not in those traditional not in those sort of traditional terms. So I think someone who has that passion and that drive, and don't get me wrong, that can't last forever.
Yeah.
But actually that person who has that, to get that momentum going and getting it to the point of sustainability, for me, is the key. Anything that I've ever looked at where that's not quite there, actually, even if they've got a great cause, even if there may be a decent support team, you always have to have somebody who can really drag it. That's been the key, and it was the key with you with the platform project. You were dragging that project, from the ground.
And screaming at times. It was a bit like having a child, right? You can't just leave it and put it in a room and then pick it back up again when you've got more time or energy and stuff. And there are plenty of moments where you think, oh, this is the best thing ever. And then the following week is like, what on earth am I doing? Just go get a job. Go back to the business. Go back to the stuff you really know what you're doing, because you kind of feel like you're making this up as you go along, right? I think one of my biggest observations sort of myself was, firstly, as I mentioned before, is it's easier, I think, to help other people do it because you have that objectivity. And when you're doing it yourself, because of that passion, it can absolutely drive the business forward, right? But it also then, to a certain extent, not clouds your judgment, but because you're so passionate about it, it gets a bit challenging to try and explain it to other people, and then sometimes see the, I guess, the financial feasibility and the long-term sustainability, because you're so passionate sometimes about that cause. So sometimes I find it's easier, as you say, getting other people involved who can kind of present that balanced view back to you. Because that was certainly one of my biggest lessons, but also the fact that actually you don't necessarily need to see the whole journey just to take the first steps, because things will evolve and your plans will change, and the landscape will, as we know now, will sometimes just pull the rug out completely from under your feet. But that doesn't mean that you don't need to get started, because when you get started, you kind of figure it out as you go along. Is that kind of common from what you've seen with other people doing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do. I think it's the same as a business. There's a reason why in my businesses I had non-exec directors, for example, and a chair, was because you want people that are arm's length. They're intelligent, they've got a great skill set. Hopefully you've got a skill set that complements your skill set, but they're also there to be non-emotional. Not to care, but actually to be non-emotional, because when you're going through that roller coaster ride, actually too much emotion is a bad thing. It's a passion you have to have, but too much emotion can cloud your judgment, and people make the best decisions when you're making them with the most amount of thought and the most amount of preparation that's gone into that as well. So I think a good support team around you, and whether people call those trustees, non-exec directors, there's lots of different names, mentor, people can use different things. It doesn't really matter on the title. What it matters is around saying the support network is there to ensure that the right decisions are made, and ultimately for the good of the organisation. And that's where, when you start getting past this initial, isn't it exciting, isn't it great, to the, oh my gosh, this is unbelievably hard phase, which every single one goes through without a doubt, then, and you're into that sustainability. I've seen some conversations that have involved the founder stepping out, because actually it's the right thing for the organisation to do. And you do see some organisations where that doesn't happen. And I look at the children's charities, the great example, probably the famous one, where that person should have left a long time before, or should have been heavily managed, inside that remit. But actually, it's amazing how often that doesn't happen inside organisations and not-for-profits. Even more so, I think, to a certain degree, because people look at it like it's not a business in the traditional business in inverted commas sense, and actually the puppy charity over here, that's trying to ask for your money and trying to do all these sorts of things over here. I think not-for-profit sits in people's heads in this middle land, and therefore they don't quite treat it like this, and they don't quite treat it like this. And I think that's the trouble. I've always looked at the successful ones that have treated it like a normal business. And if you sat with a normal business and said, what am I trying to achieve? And that could be profit. It could be to be bought in 3 years or 5 years, whatever those outcomes are. But those ones that have approached it in that same way, actually are the ones that have been focused and have driven that outcome in exactly the same way. And it could be the number of people they're helping. It could be the effect they like to have on a certain area or demographics. It doesn't matter what that outcome is that they're trying to target for, but if they approach it in that same way, you've seen them really focus and drive. Actually, then firstly, there's a less emotion that tends to come out from that because everyone's clear in the progress that they're making. But also, you don't run out of gas as much, which is where I see most fall over. Either it's because it's one person who then is that passion, who then becomes disproportionately the entire organisation. And I've been really clear when I was chief exec for 5 years, I don't think anybody can put 110% into a role like that for longer than 5 years. At some point, you're giving less and you don't realise you're giving less, but you are giving less. So that self-awareness tends to be hard to people to have. And therefore, that's why either a board or other people to help to give that self-awareness or encourage that self-awareness, but also the approach that, if you can have people that can bring some of that structure, then people are more likely to achieve what they're setting out to achieve. Where I see a lot of organisations that go a lot of left and right. I kind of think I'd like to do something good. Well, there's a lot of things you could do that are good. Is a big wide, take young people. I'd like to help all the young people that are vulnerable or have, issues, mental health issues in the UK. Well, let's be honest, that is a huge part of the youth population. So it might be that you go, that's my aspiration to try and help that, but actually what am I going to try and achieve in the next 3 years that I know that I can absolutely put my flag in the ground and I'm going to go for this one and I can realistically achieve it if it's stretching. Whereas lots of people go into something because it might have happened to themselves. There's an issue that's happened to me and therefore I'm going to start this thing, I'm going to go and do it. And I'm not really sure what I want to go and really do. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to become a charity. I'm going to be a not-for-profit. I'm going to go bang. And I sit with so many of them where I'm going, do you know what's involved in the governance of these things? Do you know the costs that are involved in these things? Do you know your obligations, your legal obligations that are involved in these things? And they sort of give you this glazed over look. No, but I just wanted to do good.
Yeah.
And you go, but you don't have to do good necessarily via this way or via this way. And I think that's the challenge, is trying to take someone's passion, that dream, and quantifying it and saying, actually, is this the right vehicle? Because that's the number one thing. If it's the right vehicle, then you'll drive the success. But actually, for some people, a not-for-profit is not the right vehicle. It might be remaining as a community group. It might be remaining, as volunteers in another piece. It might be going for a full-blown, investment thing that we're going to sit there and try and really drive scale to absolutely try and remove, let's say, homelessness in a certain town. So I don't know, it could be anything, but that's the key things I tend to come across a lot.
Yeah, I think certainly the governance thing, because we kind of obviously put out some notices to say, are there any questions you'd like to kind of probe James's brain with? And a lot of them that came up were around governance and directors and skill sets and all those sorts of things. So I want to kind of part that and come back to it. But I think two things that you just mentioned there around the vehicle and the self-awareness stuff, certainly, as you know, having worked together for just over a year now, I'm always one of those people that will always put too much in, but having to then constantly have that little self-talk and pull back and say, this is normal, that's not normal, always overstepping my own boundaries. However, I think it is very much a fine line, isn't it? Because like you say, without that passion, you can't do it. But with too much passion, you end up burning out. And it's a bit like, if you can't look after yourself, you certainly can't look after an organization and all the other people and the cause that you're trying to build. So understanding when you're kind of going too far and, when you need to kind of take a bit of a break and rein it in or top up your tank and all those sorts of things are absolutely critical, aren't they? Because if you can't look after yourself, then actually how can you do that for other people? And I think the other thing you mentioned, which is interesting, because I saw this in myself before I started the project, but maybe part of the reason why I decided to start it was sometimes we're still kind of dealing with our own stuff, and it's so much easier to try and fix other people than it is to try and fix yourself. And as well intentioned as a lot of those decisions are to want to do something good in the world, absolutely go and do it. But that stuff's going to come out at some point, and it will be really painful if that comes out at a later date, once you've built this sort of organization around your desire to want to help, and then you realize actually you've been a bit misdirected in your intentions to try and do that.
Well, that's that self-reflection piece, and actually that's you transitioning to being a leader. because a great leader is someone who does self-reflect. And I now know, if I know, you know, if I'm the person I am now, 10 years ago, my God, what would I have achieved? You know, and, you know, I didn't have a bad run at things, but actually, you know, it's hindsight, and wisdom is a great, wonderful thing. So, you know, everyone has a journey that they're going on. Everyone has demons, and everyone has a journey that they're going on. So absolutely, a lot of people will use the vehicle that they're trying to create as their self-help vehicle to try and go on that journey with people. And I think to a certain degree, because that probably puts the fuel in the tank for some people, you can't take it away completely, but that's the very fine line, as you said, around saying, this is the passion, this is the fuel that's coming in, versus it can cloud my judgment.
Yeah.
And actually, I think a lot of people, and I meet, for example, entrepreneurial people who've got great intentions, and they go, I'm going to go into, you know, I'm going to create a charity, I'm going to sit there and do a not-for-profit, I'm going to do this and this and this. You go, but in your business, you know, actually, as long as you're not trading insolvently, you're not breaking HR laws and health and safety laws, it's relatively easy, really, I think. You know, you get your accounts done with your accountant, do your other stuff. Actually, when you're going into not-for-profits, you know, charity commission, the rules around some of that stuff is absolutely immense. It's a whole other layer of governance, I think, from someone who's gone through that piece. And actually, you know, the charity commission is making it harder to become a charity. Oh, you know, they want that to be tougher. And in some ways, that's great. Yeah. But in other ways, I think it puts a huge burden on people that are trying to do good, and largely voluntarily as well, because of a few characters, as we call them, you know, that have hit the media sort of spotlight. So I think, you know, yes, I think being using something as a vehicle for your own purpose is great, but at the same time, you will find that there's a tipping point that gets reached, where if people haven't got to that stability point themselves, or they've not dealt with those issues themselves, then actually, and I said this before, sometimes the founder then can actually become the greatest risk to that organization.
And it's more about the founder and their needs than it is necessarily the needs of the organization and the people that you're helping, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think the vehicle was the other thing as well. I mean, nobody kind of like springs out of bed and say, oh, let's talk about legal structures and governance and stuff. I mean, I'm sure there must be some people, I don't know any. But I think that was one of my sort of early decisions around the platform project. And do I go down the charity route? And, you know, we had agonizing conversations where I was looking at the structure of the business and which way we go, and do we stay, do we go? And it was like the hokey pokey at one point, wasn't it? But I think for me, the bit that I still then came back to, which is what I started off with, is charity absolutely has its place, but having obviously worked in a consultancy capacity with a lot of charities, you say it gets harder and harder. The breadth of opportunities you have around kind of your trading model and income opportunities and revenue diversification, all those sorts of things are very restrained. But then at the other time, kind of the corporate side of things is, well, I don't want to be a limited company. I want the structure of my company to show what it's there to do. You know, so the choice that we made was going down the CIC route, so for the community interest company. Now, the reason for me behind that, even though I knew it wasn't going to make my life any easier, because you get no tax breaks, you don't get anything for free, you still have to pay everything out, but there's no profits as such, is because I thought, well, actually, if we're going to be teaching young people to be entrepreneurial, it kind of felt hypocritical to say, we'll be entrepreneurial, but we're going to rely on charitable funding. I wanted to be able to trade and stand on our own 2 feet and start to earn money. And obviously that's going to be a long-term journey, but trying to make sure that we've at least got a bit more sort of financial sustainability. So I think for where we were at, that's still the right decision, even though it's certainly not an easy decision to make. But it was also a key decision for me around how are we going to scale this? I think you're right, is the startup phase was absolutely challenging and came with lots of blood, sweat and many tears, but the scale up bit for me, and how do you take a startup, which is great, is almost like a cottage industry, like kind of working from your living room, to then an organization that has infrastructure and governance and staff and premises, and oh my god, we're actually going to talk profit margins in a not-for-profit and stuff. So all of those kind of business disciplines and how do you grow a business but without any money kind of thing was a thing, an even harder lesson for me, as well as also learning how to redelegate, because it can't all come back to me and just be me doing this stuff, which is still a work in progress, as you know. So I guess having, again, because you've worked with so many different projects at different stages of their life cycle, what would you say really helps organizations to scale, to go from that, right, well, I've kind of tested the water, and I kind of know, I think I know what works, but I want to make it bigger. I want it to stand on its own 2 feet, be a bit more financially sustainable, and I want to kind of grow in sort of not-for-profit terms. So where should people be focusing their efforts and their attentions? Because there's always too much to do and not enough time. So I think it really is about prioritizing, isn't it? And maintaining that mental clarity around where you spend your efforts. So what can people do to scale?
No, I think you're right. And, you know, look, we can laugh now about the metaphorical arm wrestling that we did around structure and, you know, how to scale, etc. But it was right to do that, because if you don't get that right, it causes you so much grief down the line. And to give you one example, we were helping volunteers go across to Kenya, and that was under a CIC wrapper. And it sort of hit this wall. It wasn't growing, you know, and I wasn't involved in it sort of day to day, but helping. And when we really sat down and thrashed it out, that's when we formed the charitable foundation, and then went to a limited company as a travel company, because it was about saying, actually, if you focus on the outcomes that we're trying to drive, what we're trying to drive is charitable giving to help these projects, but also help facilitate young people to have life-changing volunteering experiences. And actually, at the moment, it's not quite right, because there was the CIC almost, there was a guilt to paying wages, right? Because we're sort of charitable, but we're not really a business, right?
Identity confusion.
Right? What am I trying to do? And this person who, you know, who's running it day in, day out, I'm like, but you've got to take a wage. And I actually funded the wage for the first 18 months. That was my gift to the sort of creating, but said it's getting cut off, so we've got to create this sustainably at this 18-month period. And that was, like I said, that was when we flipped it to say, actually, a limited company is here to make profit. It's here to pay wages, and decent wages to get decent people, including for the founder. Because the reality was, if that doesn't happen, it's not sustainable. The project is not sustainable. If it's not sustainable, we're going to have a lot less people, what we would like to help, in the next decade, 20 years, 30 years, right? That's the kind of the aim we were trying to go for in terms of vision. And I remember when we sat down, and I hope you don't mind saying this, we had that blunt conversation. And I said, look, do you want to take a wage from this? Do you want to earn money from this? It's important, because ultimately that governance, whether you go here or here or over here, if you go to a charity and then say, I want to try and get grants of £100,000 a year in order to pay myself £100,000 a year, well, that is a very different beast to something that's a limited company potentially over here, or a CIC that's over here. And I think it's massively important. Lots of people go in and register themselves as charities. They look at gift aid and go, that's it, I get gift aid, I get some free licenses from this and this, run straight in.
Yep.
And although we arm wrestled over that over a long period of time, it was to sit there and say, actually, what are you wanting to achieve out of this? Because you're the founder, you're the one with the passion. What's the outcome we're trying to get? And actually, which of those are solved in the easiest, simplest way, like you said, on that scale piece, by doing it. And actually, you remember our conversation, which was, if we want the young people to act entrepreneurial, well then, can we do that as a charity? Can we, is it the heart of everything that we want to do if we make it a charity? And actually, it's not. So therefore, it wasn't right. The whole ethos, the whole spirit of the organization, I think wouldn't have been right. And you wouldn't have driven the outcomes that you were trying to drive. So I think the structure piece is hard, and actually getting the advice for the structure is a real challenge for people. And that's the reason why I end up getting lots of conversations with lots of different people, because they'll come to me and go, I remember a homeless one, and they were like, we want to do a charity. We've got all these people that are helping doing X, Y, and Z. I was like, have you got anyone that's good at governance, or anyone who's sort of good at organisation, paperwork, all this sort of stuff, any of this sort of stuff? No. I'm like, well, I probably wouldn't do that if I was you, because I think on the two things you've told me in this one conversation, I think you've already broken the charity commission rules. And you just have to understand, you're lovely people and you're amazing, but actually you're putting yourself out there. And if you can't do this and this, then I really wouldn't, because it will come off. That organisation blew up. It blew up, and it was 3/4 of the way going to a charity, and it sort of self-imploded for that exact reason. So the structure wasn't right. They weren't really clear on the outcome. We'd like to try and help people. And why? Because it was born out of an experience of one person whose son became homeless. There's lots of X, Y, and Z reasons, and that's what I mean by that tipping point of the emotion, the passion is not quite right, and it could never scale because it wasn't clear what it was ever going to scale to. And we had the same conversation talking about, the platform project, and you said, I want to help these young people. Well, how do we want to help them? What do we want to do? You want to do that in schools or outside of schools? Do we want to do it in schools? There's a lot of schools. We could spend eternity just dealing with schools. So if that's the mechanism we're going to try and do, let's go down that. Actually, if we don't want to go there, we want to go to local councils. Well, then we know local councils are not quick. They're not easy to deal with. And we're going to have to sit there and get in those conversations, pretty quickly, right? So I think that's the key. And people generally don't map this stuff out on a piece of paper or a laptop or wherever they're going to sit there and try and do it. They don't map that out. They have this idea in their head, same as entrepreneurial style do. I get this genius idea, but actually the more you map that out, and the more you map out in, old school SWOT analysis. But if you do these things and you map that out and just go, actually, what are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? If you start to do that, you'll start to see, I've got a few holes here, a few questions that if I became a charity, would that be better or worse for me? Or actually, if I become a CIC, I think it would be better if I did this and this. And maybe I'm going to have one person with a conversation now just to ask that one question. Whereas I think a lot of people come to me and go, I'd like to help people. What do I do? What do I become? What do I go? And by the way, how do I scale that? You go, I don't understand what you're trying to get at in any way, shape, or form. And when they do get funding, if there is funding, or like with you, where we were really trying to focus on, there's income, but there's good income and there's bad income. There are some things that might come with 1,000 strings attached to it, whether a CIC or a charitable organisation. So, sometimes you have to learn to say no. Mm-hmm. It's easy to say no. If you've got a clear strategic idea of exactly what I'm trying to achieve, then you go, is that in it? No. Well, in which case, let's not go and do that. Let's not take that money. And actually, if we're going to go and scale, and this is exactly the same with the business, it's exactly the same conversation. I say to people, get the nut planted right, and that tree will grow. I promise you. But most people do not plant it right. They don't get a proof of concept, and therefore they've got no way of creating a scale. They never made it successful at this size, and then they just think, if I make it 20 times bigger, it will miraculously sort itself out. And you go, most of the time, about 95% of the time, it becomes 20 times the bigger nightmare and actually tends to implode or explode, one of the two. So it's very common.
I think that was one of the really interesting points as well, actually, because I hadn't spotted kind of how my mindset had changed. That, as you say, any sort of entrepreneur, you start with the, oh my God, here's an idea, and you can make it, this is what it would look like if it was like full size, and you kind of go off down this, 5 years time, like this and this and this and this. And then you're like, oh, I can't kind of like prove that would work. I need to start somewhere. So it's like, I need that smaller acorn. I need my full first steps, as you say, to get sort of proof of concept. And I think what I've done is kind of broken it down to the point. It's like, right, okay, of all of this is the bit that we need to start with to prove actually if we can make this bit work, then the concept is sound. So kind of running things almost like we did like week-long half-term challenges and things like that. But then I think what I hadn't spotted at the time was actually that then became my new normal. And then what I was doing, like with my mindset, my focus was, right, how do I scale that? And I think I'd kind of not given up, but I think maybe kind of stepped too far away from the big picture, long-term kind of vision of what should this look like. And then as the conversation we were having is kind of applying for funding around how do I fund more of these? And it's like, well, actually, this is the tip of the iceberg. This isn't scalable. This isn't workable as an organization with infrastructure. It would need staff, and it's costing more. And well, where's the income? It's not sustainable, but it's the starting point, but it's not the end goal as such. And I think you do, particularly when you've got passion, you sometimes get too close to what you're trying to do, that you lose that objectivity to see the bigger picture. So that was one of the most valuable conversations we had up front.
And you know, and also remember, and again, this is a really common thing for not for profits, because you may well get some grants, you know, which you've had as well. But actually, if you've got core trading activity, which lots of not for profits do, and I massively encourage it because it helps with sustainability, does it make any money?
Yeah.
And I think the problem is people have not for profit in their head. We go, I can't make a profit.
I know, it's like profit is a dirty word, right?
No,
Money's a dirty word. Yeah.
And that's the reason why for some people, and we did in this other scenario I was talking about earlier, actually we created a limited company. It was there to make profit, unashamedly to make profit, not to make some, you know, ridiculous return for shareholders, but actually to go, it's not a dirty thing. And actually, you know, to have the right ABSA cover and the all the other bits, a limited company is actually the most sensible thing to sit there and try and do, and a charitable foundation on the other side then for the charitable giving. So I think lots of people look at it and go, and I ultimately had businesses that I created that were profitable. And actually, ironically, I was a limited company. I always had limited companies. I ran those businesses to help people. I give away huge sums of money to people in charitable giving, or gave away time, resources, use my office space, all of those things that sit there and try and go around it. So I was actually charitable in nature and what I was trying to do. But if someone sat in front of me and said, hang on, you're making profit. Well, I am. Because if I don't make any profit, I don't exist. Right? And these companies now, and these not-for-profits now, that are going to be going for the COVID kind of, you know, test of time. It's about sitting there saying, if you want the sustainability and the durability and the resilience built into your organization, you have to have, you know, ultimately, you know, diversity of income. You have to have enough margin that says, actually, do you know what? Yes, I might have a good year here and I might have made more money. Or, you know, do I feel really bad about that because I've made more money? Well, no, because you can either give away more money, or actually what you've got is sustainability when something happens. And the law of averages tells you something will always happen. So if you're making money over here, I didn't see myself as Robin Hood, but, you know, we dealt with some massive entities, and we made a decent profit. We gave them a brilliant service with a great product. And do you know what? That helped me to give a free service to some charities, maybe to some schools and some other pieces. So I had exactly the same mindset, even as a limited company. As a CIC, it's no different to sit there and say, if I want to do this, and I want to do this for, let's say in the scenario of doing something with schools, if I want to do that with 1,000 schools, well then I'm going to have major infrastructure. I'm going to have that management level. I'm going to have all those things that come with that organisation. So actually, if I don't cost that in now, I'm never ever going to be able to scale to that degree over here. Ever going to be able to do it. So that piece, you know, that we've worked on so hard with the platform project is trying to say, actually, if it works now on that school and then these 3 schools, and it works with this number of young people, well, actually now if we then double the number, do we have to double the overhead, or do we only need 25% of the overhead? Because actually we only need one person, because, you know, the head office cost is now the head office cost. We've already got that in there, right? You get that formula nailed, then it's an issue of saying, I only now need customers. What's my focus? Well, I just focus on customers because that's all I need. That's the one bit of the jigsaw that's missing. Or it might be I've got a capital outlay that I need of, let's say, £10,000. Well, then, you know, if you're going for grants or you're asking for donations or whatever you're doing, that is the bit of the jigsaw that I am missing that unlocks the whole of the rest of this jigsaw, which outlocks this outcome that I'm trying to sit there and get to over here. And that's the bit that I sense people who are naturally going into something with a passion and maybe don't have a business background, feel it's awkward. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to do it. But actually, it's a central pillar of their entire thinking.
Yeah, and it's funny, isn't it? Because again, it was one of the biggest lessons for me was around actually what you're offering is valuable. You know, it's physically valuable as well as socially valuable. So talking about like school services as well, actually, if there was a corporate company out there that would be charging them to provide this valuable service, they would be making a margin. So actually we should be making a margin, because that margin can then go and self-fund our other projects that maybe don't tick funding boxes. So it means that if I, like say with the Robin Hood kind of take from one hand and then give to the other, because it gives us more choice and I guess independence around what we do and where we spend our money, because it's money that we've generated rather than necessarily just from kind of very tight boxes within funding. But I think, as you say, it is about that. I guess, and it, again, even with the business background, it still took me a while to remember that money is not a bad thing. So I think when you start a small business and you go self-employed and things, it's like that old, oh, what I want to work with a client, but I don't like invoicing them. How much should I ask for? And you always underquote for your services, and it takes confidence and think actually it's worth this much, so I should be pitching at this much. And I think it's exactly the same kind of mindset and that learning curve, isn't it? But one thing I really want to circle back around, because you've touched on it a couple of times now, is skill set. Because I think there's a lot of people who maybe want to start a not-for-profit, who maybe have got a great sparkling idea and have got a bit of an idea about how they can start it. But again, one of the things I recognize is that I could only take it so far. You know, we needed volunteers and things to get it off the ground, but actually to scale it, I needed people that were a hell of a lot better at financial management than I was, with missing off my zeros every now and then, and people with objective strategic mindsets like yourself, and people with contacts. And actually to grow any organization, you need those people around you. So like I say, whether it's around non-exec directors, mentors, a board and those sorts of things, bringing other people in to your not-for-profit, I think, is the do or die difference between, does it stay where it is or can it move on? Can it scale? Can it grow? So if we're going to look at kind of governance and a board and maybe bringing in those other sort of specialists, what advice would you have? Because that's kind of the core theme around some of the questions that we've had. What advice would you have for people who say, right, I've started, but I want to get better, I want to get bigger, I want to get bolder, and I need to bring people in? So how would they attract the right people? Because that can obviously kind of derail you. How would they maybe pitch it with people with different skill sets? What kind of skill sets should they be looking for with the board and the governance and stuff? So how would you scale it from a broadening of that skill set?
Good question, large question. You know, I think it's a bit like school governors. Actually, there's a lot of people who would do it, and it's a huge time drag.
Yeah.
And finding people that are actually right and relevant for that role is a real challenge. And you know, most people, let's face it, tend to go with people they know, because that's the comfort zone and that's the people I kind of get across. But actually, very few boards will look at the skill set, you know, and go, actually, it doesn't really matter if you get on. You don't have to get on like a house on fire. I always used to say to the team that work for me, I want you to trust and respect me, whether you like me or not. It's an optional extra. I mean, the fact that he largely did, you know, as a Times Top 100 employer, but it's an on piece. And I think it's exactly the same when you're trying to find people. You need to find someone that you trust and respect. But actually, the fact they've got a different point of view from you is a great thing, probably, because it means that when you've debated exactly as we did on what structure to take, we were arm wrestling back and forward. It meant the decision that came out at the end of that was, I think, a great one. And it's been one of those reasons for that success. So if you look at that and say, like you say, either self-awareness, someone writes down, or says, go and ask my family and friends, what do you think I'm good at? What do you think I'm not so good at? It's not you're awful, but what am I not so good at? Well, actually, if it comes back and they go, you're really bad at timekeeping, right? You're really bad at, if you're entrepreneurial, I can tell you what the list is now, but you know, you're really, really bad at paperwork, right? You're awful at paperwork. You know, you shouldn't be good at that and that. And you're really not good at taking minutes, right? Awful at taking minutes of a meeting. If you, whatever those lists are, right? Because you'll have them from ex-colleagues or friends or family. I'd look at that and go, okay, right. What I'm really good at doing, I don't know, it might be operational things. I'm great at making things happen, right? I'm a problem solver. I'm amazing at that stuff. But maybe I'm not strategic, or maybe I've got absolutely no idea about margins or commercial or sales or marketing. You know, they're the things that I've never done in my life, and you know, I've got no want to try and do them in some way, shape, or form. I think if you start to map these things out, you'll start to see similar to a jigsaw, there's a few glaring holes. So that's the first thing, because the more focus that you've got, the easier it is to get someone to fill that hole. If you just go out and go, I'm just looking for some people to come and join me, cast the net out, right? As you were in fishing, you're going to get a lot of rubbish. That's going to come back in. That's not rubbish in terms of people, but rubbish in necessarily the right skill sets that you're after. In terms of attracting people, I think if it's clear what you're after, you're clear that I've got this, but actually I only want this to fill, and it's very crystal clear what the ask is, you are much more likely to get highly capable, highly skilled people in that hole. The ones that I find are too vague, I'm not quite sure, then actually if you're in a really busy career and you'll really sit there and full on, you're never likely to accept that. 99% of people are not likely to accept it, right? You get some people that lie. I remember when I joined the Swindon and Wiltshire Let Board and they were like, oh, I'm sure it's just a few hours a month, just one meeting and that's all you got to do. What I didn't see was actually you've got about 3 or 4 days of reading a month to do before you walk into that room. Same as when I was a school governor, so you go, actually, what is the realistic ask of that person, and it could be you're after their connections, could be you're after their skill set, could be you're after that direction of, actually, I would like you just to help me create my strategic goals. So I don't need you to help me ongoing because I'm good at the operational bit. I can make that do, but you know what? That real strategic plan is not my strength in some way, shape or form. Or actually, I'm really rubbish with numbers and I can't afford to pay someone to go and do my accounts. So my ask is to get someone to come in and help me just for, first 12 months whilst we hit there and get from here to here, and then I can afford an accountant to come and help me. So therefore I'm asking for a local accountancy firm. I'm going to go and ring them, 5 or 6 of them. Would you sit there and donate me this service for the first year? You'll get some no's, of course you will, but actually they'll think that most people want to give their time to help achieve something, but they can't say yes to everybody. So they're more likely to say yes to the ones they think are more likely to be successful. And you're more likely to be more successful if it's clear what you're asking to try and do. I've seen great success on putting stuff out on LinkedIn. There are some organisations, if you look locally to you in Swindon, the Voluntary Action Swindon, for example, you've got a list of vacancies there which are being published regularly to, who's after what, from local organisations, etc. So most councils will have an organisation like that locally that you can go to and say, could you pop up this vacancy for me? And they'll distribute that to the largest corporates, the biggest businesses, that kind of scenario. So, LinkedIn or traditional, and you've been very good at this, using the local media. I've got a good story over here, and inside this story, what I really want to try and do is publicise the fact that I need someone to come and help me with this. So, you want to cast that net as wide as you can. Why? Because, as you know, those couple of blocks coming into place are the bits that give you the foundation to really take it to another level. So, what you don't want to do is go, well, I've asked my neighbour left and right of me. They said no. Well, there you go then. Well, hang on, the milkman said yes. There we go. We're all done now. We're set up. We're going to scale. We're going to make this thing, 100 times bigger than what it was in some way, shape, or form. And same in the world of business. If you employ 5 salespeople, if you get 2 or 3 of them in a year's time still working for you, you've done quite well, frankly. And I've had, times at 100 employer, amazing HR people, great processes. It's the law of averages. So, if you're going through a real good process and you're clear about what you want, and you get that building block in place, as a founder, then I think, you know that you've got all those people around you. And as I always call it, when you're going to go to war, who do you want left and right hand side of you? You've got those people that have got your back in terms of, you're the finance person, I'm awful at numbers. You're great at social media, I have got no idea what a tweet is, right? If you've got all those people sat around you on the table, what you know then is when the problem comes into the middle of the table, and every organisation gets problems, actually between that table, you've got the answer. And you've got a way then of making that into a solution and a way of making that come into real life. And that process, if you get that right, it doesn't really matter what comes your way. COVID can come your way now. Some of the organisations that I'm part of, I'm looking and going, they're going to thrive. They will use this opportunity to truly thrive. Whereas some organisations that I'm talking to that I'm, you know, not in the inner circle, so to speak, they're petrified they're not going to last 3 months. And actually, the challenges are exactly the same, but the way they're tackling that because of the people that are around them is a very, very different approach.
Yeah, and I think it was certainly a lesson for me, because I mean, I did like what everybody else did. It's like, well, we've got similar interests, so, you know, kind of come and help me. But actually, that's got a very short lifespan, like you say, you know, kind of you progress past that. So you need to get the proper skill sets in. But I think something that I've heard quite a few people mention is almost like an apprehension around that. And I get where they're coming from with it is, but what if I kind of put my ideas on a plate and then say, will you come and help me? What if they steal the idea? Or what if I kind of lose control and like my baby ends up not being like my baby and it doesn't do what I set it up to do because they've got very different ideas and things. And I think it's almost like this tussle between, I know I should, but I'm a bit worried. It's kind of like, I'll go send my teenager off to go live with somebody else for sort of 2 years and then see how it comes back again. So it's, yeah, I think the apprehension is definitely there. And I think for me, I learned very much up front, there will always be some people who will think, oh, okay, that's quite good. And then they'll maybe go and kind of pitch it elsewhere. But actually, you know what, you've been thinking about this for 2-3 years, you know, you've got lots of stuff under the waterline. Actually, you know, ideas are always vulnerable to somebody else thinking, oh, that's a good idea, I'll take that. But actually 9 times out of 10, they're not going to do what you're doing because they're not willing to go as far as you're willing to go. And actually that's the first time they've ever considered it. So you've already done a lot of the groundwork and such. So I don't consider it to be that much of a risk from putting it out there. And I think in terms of the I guess the almost like, I think people think about like a business almost like power struggle, but like you say, if you spot the right people, you're clear about who you want, what you want them to do, and they're people that are being very picky about how they choose their time, they're not going to come in and try and take over, because they're there, they want to help rather than take it on. So
yeah, I think Sadie, if you, again, let's use you as a live example, right? In the conversations we had, we can share these conversations, but it's saying you're doing a role inside the organization. Now, actually, who does that role is just about defining what that role is.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people go, and I had this when I left my business, you know, when I first sort of took over, it was, you are the culture, you are that business, you are that stuff. Actually, my greatest achievement was when I went, a large amount of the team were not bothered. My wife was like, why are you not upset? And I said, because it's not about me. It's never about me. I've worked really hard for it to not be about me, actually. And that's what I mean by, you know, some people will run an organization, it doesn't make them a good leader.
Yep.
And you know, it's no different if you're setting up a business, a not-for-profit. You know, the odds of success are slim because it's hard, right? It is hard. And so if someone comes up and says, well, I'm going to chase this idea, I'm going to go and take it on, have they got that passion, right? Because that's the gas. It's the gas that will keep that thing going, especially in that first 6-12 months when you're going to hit every single hurdle in the world. So meeting someone who's had probably a personal experience, you know, which is what I normally come across. Someone's had a personal experience which has driven them to do this in the first place. It's given that unrivaled passion. The odds of that are so unbelievably remote. It's untrue, point one. And point two is, actually, the world is about collaboration. And let's face it, right? With some of the people like Trump and that in the world at the moment, we've never been so disjointed and, you know, each for their own. But it's about collaboration and the strength in depth. And for me, if I looked at someone else and said, okay, you'd like to do something slightly different, you know, I disagree with trustees of the charitable foundation that we set up in 2016, right? Good, because we're not robots. We're not all exactly the same people. You know, that's what the world is there to sit there and try and do. But actually, if you know that, I always think it's like your partner. The first 2 conversations you've got to have when you're serious, you realize it's serious. You know, do you want to get married and do you want to have kids? Because if those 2 things you're not aligned with, you are always going to have a major problem at some point in your life. That conversation that you and I had was, do you want to do this for a wage? Are you looking to sell this, right? Because for me, there were 2 fundamental conversations. And if those conversations hadn't been honest or hadn't been clear what we were trying to do, I absolutely would have walked away. It's the same thing. So I think if you're meeting someone and saying, actually, no, we are completely and utterly not just poles apart, but we're ethically not right, I'd agree. I've met people in my world that have got the moral, moral code that's probably akin to Donald Trump. Do I really want to be tied with him then? No, I don't really. But actually, can we have a difference of opinion of how to get from A to B? Yeah, that's a good thing. That's a good arm wrestle to sit there and try and have, because you're probably one's coming at it from a sales and marketing perspective, and someone else is coming at it from a completely operational, I don't care about that, social media or whatever it is. That's good, because actually the outcome should still be ultimately what you're trying to do, which is, if I'm trying to help young, vulnerable people, are we agreed on that? Because if we're agreed on that, actually that's okay. If you sit there and go, no, I want to help, vulnerable elderly people above the age of 75, and I want to help people less than the age of 16, no, you're not agreed. And ultimately you should just go your own sort of separate ways in some way, shape or form. And that last piece, like I said, about sustainability, I think it's exactly the same again as any business. To have people hand the reins over, or to be able to step back, is a hugely, hugely challenging thing. Very few businesses manage to do it well, and very few not-for-profits and charities manage to do it well. It tends to be that person until that person retires.
Yeah.
And that's where, for me, the judgment of my success, and I'd always encourage anyone else who creates a not-for-profit or tries to scale it, is to say, if you are made redundant, if you are not required in that organization, then you have done your job. You have done your job. If it needs you to the last minute of you leaving that door, then you have failed as a leader, because ultimately it should be there another 10 years after you're there in some way, shape or form. If you've created something which is sustainable, which is, able to sit there and give, because you know what, God forbid, this pandemic has shown anything can sit there and try and happen in some way, shape or form. So sustainability is about saying, what's my role? When I replace myself as a chief exec with another chief exec, it was clear, this is what I do, right? And this is it. So actually, I could advertise my job over here. Is that person the same person as me? No. Are they a copy of me? No. But actually, the outcomes the organization are trying to achieve and what that role does, that's clear. And it's clear for everyone else. So actually, whatever you call that person, general manager, MD, director, it makes no difference what that role is. And you get some people that will want this title of, founder. I want to be founder, right? I want to be known on the person who created that spark and did that piece. It's for you.
Yeah.
It's ultimately not. It's ultimately not for the whoever you're trying to help or whoever you're trying to take over. And I think some people get obsessed with. We bought this old cottage, 250-year-old cottage, and I remember saying to the owners, "I know that I'm just a custodian of this house. I don't really own it. I'm just a custodian of it, right? I'm going to hand it over to someone else at some point. It's just another part of that journey." And if you're not and go, it's my house, it's always going to be my other house. You can't change that wall. Don't paint that thing. Don't do this piece. And that is what a lot of people who have not-for-profits are like. They're like, it's my walls. Don't touch them. Don't put your picture on there. It's not, if you do that, then you go, what is this about? Who are you doing this for? Are you doing it for those young people? Are you doing it for the homeless people? Whatever your cause is, you're sitting there trying to make in some way, shape or form. And that's the bit that I saw the change in you over that period of time, where you went from that, I'm in the trenches, I'm getting shot at, I just got to do what I got to do, to suddenly lifting your head up and actually standing there, standing still and going, I'm just going to observe what's going on. And actually now I realise what the right thing is to do for the organisation. And actually I can either do the bits that I really want to enjoy and add value, or actually I could do something else. And if I do something else, it's okay, because I know that what I set out to achieve is going to be happening, or is going to be happening maybe even better without me, in some way, shape or form. And that's the leader. So if you're going to do a not-for-profit, do a leadership course, right? Read some stuff online, read some good books around that leadership, because you are a leader, whether you realize it or not. People go, I'm just a little old idea of it. You're a leader, right? And you will have all of those leadership challenges as you come across it. And if you realize you're focused on the outcome, then actually I've got no problem. I will not stay with my charitable foundation we set up. So, the second that I find another trustee with the right skill set, I will absolutely step away from it, because it was never about me. It was just about enabling it from A to B, and there's a C and a D that will come afterwards, frankly.
Oh, fascinating. I mean, I've known you for over a year now, and even I've learned something in this last year. So I guess if we were going to start kind of wrapping the call up, then we've talked about so many different things, and obviously all of them are really important, but for kind of clarity and brevity, are there maybe 3 top tips that you could share for somebody either looking to sort of start or scale a not-for-profit and kind of make their dream a reality, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's been around, number one is you've got to have someone who's got a passion for the cause. I still stand by that. You need that gas in the tank. You need a great support network. There is strength in depth always. And I think if you identify clearly what the need is and what you want to achieve, because time and resource is really precious for any organization, but not for profit even more so, you are far more likely to achieve what you actually want to go and achieve. And if you've achieved it and you want to do another set of goals after that, because I never thought I'd get here, when I sat down with the Excalibur team and said, we're going to become a Times Top 100 employer. I mean, it was so far away from where we were. I can't describe to you how far away it was. Or in monetary terms, it was £50,000 profit. We did the same thing that we did and turned it into £1.5 million plus profit. It was so far away. But then you go to the next goal and the next goal. But it's about you just sitting there being really clear. I know identify the need, and actually, because some people don't identify the need, they go from their own personal experience and go, I've had this one-off experience. Actually, are there 100 people out there to help? If that's what you want to achieve, are there actually 100 people out there to help? So if someone is homeless, you go, I want to help all the homeless people here. Well, how many are there? Well, actually, there's 60. Okay, well, my aim is to get 60 people off the street. Great. If my aim is to create these organizations to stop homelessness, and you find out, actually, there was only 4 people here. It turns out those other ones are just traveling through. They were going down to Bristol. It does happen. It sounds crazy, but it does happen because they've not stood back a bit and taken that emotion out and gone, if I just make a couple of phone calls, maybe to the council, maybe to the local health authority, like, actually, I could ask these couple of questions. And actually, do you know what? It might just help me get that clarity of thought. And if I get that clarity of thought, I am more likely to smash it out of the park. And that focus, ruthless focus, as I always call it, is the difference of people that look back and go, I've achieved what I wanted to achieve, or the people who sit there and they're frustrated, the gas runs out of the tank, and then they let it all go aside.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, James. I think we could go on for hours about various other bits and bobs that were all related to the key topics, but what I've tried to do with these as well is make sure that we don't kind of go too far down the seriousness rabbit hole. So something that I did in my last session, kind of relatively off the fly, and I thought I'd subject you to the same question, was one of the best and worst ever speed dating questions I got asked, because apparently it tells you lots about a person and who they are, is if you were a cake or a biscuit, what type would you be and why? So what would you be, James, for the world to hear?
I would be a Jaffa cake. And because, and some people will probably find this maybe debatable, but I'm slightly crunchy on the outside because I'm actually very shy. I know people probably don't believe it, but I am actually quite shy. I don't like going into a room with people I don't know in any way, shape or form. And people might take that as me being a bit crunchy, right, a bit frosty, but actually underneath that, I'm soft as jelly. But, on the outside, you've got to get through that thin layer first before you get to the kind of squidgy bit underneath. So, probably a Jaffa cake.
Nice. Well, the world understands you better. Thank you so much, James. It has been an absolute pleasure. So if you have been watching, you've just been watching Sadie Sharp and James Phipps on the Sharp Shares video blog. So we've been talking about charity this week and how to launch a not-for-profit, and other weeks we go into all sorts of other areas around education, life, work, and all those things that make us who we are as a human being. So thank you very much for watching. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, James.
Take care.